Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear us. We have a lot of people rolling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started just in the interest of time to make sure that our panelists have enough time to talk about tonight's session. So welcome to Semantics in a Neurodiverse World. This is hosted by Hope Enterprises and our Autism Collaborative Centers of Excellence. That's actually a grant-funded project through the All One Foundation that really supports services and resources and families across 13 counties in Pennsylvania. And that's really to connect them with just having a better service for the community. So I just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping items before I pass it along to our panelists tonight. So the session is going to be recorded. Everybody is going to be on mute, and I'll begin the recording after I introduce our moderator. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, or you'd like to talk to the panelists, we're going to be sharing their information at the very end with a slide, and we will also send that out via email to everybody. But we do encourage you to use the chat, as we're trying to leave about 15 to 20 minutes at the very end to answer any of those questions. So I think at this time we're ready to dive right in to give everybody the most amount of time to talk with our panelists. So I'd like to introduce Emily Kammerer. She is Hope's Director of Community Outreach. She's also really been an integral part to our Autism Collaborative Centers of Excellence, and she is going to join us and be tonight's moderator. So Emily, give me just 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording, and we're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Welcome, everybody. I'm very honored to be sharing the virtual stage tonight with these great panelists who represent not only our local city here in Williamsport, which is in central Pennsylvania. We have panelists from New Jersey, and then we also have our other panelist is joining us from the UK, which is great. He's in Nottingham, which I just learned tonight is in the center of England, which is great. So he's staying up late with us tonight, as he's 5 hours ahead. But I without further ado, I'm going to start with ladies first and introduce Amber Logan.
Hi.
Hopefully the video starts here in a second.
The Drums Alive team met the Drums Alive training for the Pawtucket School District teachers and the Drums Alive Master Trainer Camp in Pawtucket, Rhode Island on August 16th through 18th, 2016. At the start of the training, Amber was shy and reticent, but as the day progressed, it was evident that her attention and engagement grew. After observing Amber, Carrie believed that Amber could teach a lesson plan from the Drums Alive Drumtastic curriculum. And she did, with great success. It was at that moment that Amber realized for herself that she could teach others to do the Drums Alive program and experience the joy of music, movement, and rhythm just as she did. It was a privilege to witness how Amber's confidence grew by leaps and bounds that day. It was a transformational experience, not only for Amber, but for all of us who got to experience her sense of accomplishment. It was as wondrous as watching a butterfly breaking free from its cocoon. In April 2017, Amber, as an official Drums Alive Master Trainer, was a presenter with a team of her fellow Master Trainers at the National SHAPE Conference in Boston, Massachusetts. There were more than 100 people in the workshop, and Amber was magnificent. Her light shined so brightly, and we couldn't be more proud to have her on our team of Drums Alive ambassadors. Now, Amber leads Drums Alive classes for the ELYMCA, and we are delighted to know she continues to inspire others and share the Drums Alive program. We know she will help others transform and realize their potential by being the role model and leader she is.
Sorry, Emily, I believe that you're muted.
How about now? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Amber, welcome. I'm so glad that you're with us, that Drums Alive video is great. For those that live in the Williamsport area, you may have heard about the program that's run at our local YMCAs. But Amber, you're involved in more even beyond that, right? Like, can you share a little bit about some other advocacy you've done?
And glad to be with you all today. I love to tell the story of my struggles and successes in the community. I work for Advocacy Alliance, Drums Alive instructor. I enjoy speaking at conferences.
That's perfect.
Yes.
That works out great. We're really excited to have you. Thanks for being with us. I want to introduce our next panelist here, Chris Bonello. Chris is, again, he's joining us from across the pond. So it's a little bit later where he's at. It's what, about 10 o'clock? Is that right?
Yep, 10 past 10.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds about right. Can you share a little bit about yourself for those that don't know you?
Yep, sure. I used to be a primary school teacher, but then I left it when I realized how much mainstream education sucks. I'm now a special needs tutor in a school specifically for autistic students. I'm autistic myself. And since 2015, I've also been an autism advocate, speaker, writer, and so on. I run a blog / website called Autistic Not Weird. Because I decided after, in fact, yeah, I'm literally just wearing the hoodie because, well, I spent far too much money on it, so like, why not?
Right.
And yeah, I decided that after years and years of keeping my, well, diagnosed Asperger's syndrome, I just call myself autistic now, but after keeping the diagnosis secret for far too many years, I decided the natural next step was to just tell the whole internet. And it went surprisingly well. Autistic Not Weird's Facebook page now has 140,000 followers, and my website's had more than 2.5 million page hits. And that wasn't the plan. I was not intending for that many people to be reading my stuff. But one thing led to another. Now I get to call myself an award-winning writer and international speaker. But more than anything else, I see that as a reflection of how much demand there is out there from people who want to learn about autism, especially from autistic perspectives, not least anyone here who's watching this. So yeah, thank you for that. And I'm very grateful to A, be here, and B, play a part in the massive awareness acceptance drive that's really taken off these last few years. I'm also an action novelist. I can't believe every time I say that sentence, I can't believe I've just said that sentence. But yeah, I've written a series of neurodiverse war novels about a near future where the whole of Britain's been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and only 12 people are free in the abandoned British countryside to try and free them. And 8 of those people are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So you've got autistic heroes, dyslexic heroes, and heroes of ADHD, anxiety, and Down syndrome, and so on. And yeah, the thing I find really funny is that used to be kind of a coping mechanism for unemployment. And yeah, if we talk about the recruitment process, I have plenty to rant about with regards to that. But the one good thing about being unemployed for so long is that I wrote this daft story as a coping mechanism. And well, now the third book in the series is coming out in the autumn. And yeah, it's beautifully hilarious. And I'm also a massive Rubik's Cube geek. These make amazing fidget toys, by the way, but I can also solve them as well. In fact, they're surprisingly addictive as well. My all-time record for solving one of these is 16.62 seconds. Rather irritatingly, I almost beat my record. I think it was yesterday, but I was 0.2 of a second off it. But anyway, I digress. These are massively addictive, and I absolutely love solving them, especially when people are watching. There you go.
Yeah, I
that's
was going to
basically
say it's massively addicting to watch as well. So
No, thank you.
Please go on. Yes.
That's right. That's a basic introduction to me. I'm autistic. I'm a notorious geek, and I have plenty to say about autism from an autistic perspective.
That's great. One more thing that I think would be great for context. So when did you discover that you had autism? When were you diagnosed?
I discovered that I was autistic at the age of 24. It was 2009, and it was my sister who pointed it out because, well, we both went into education, and at that time, my experience of autism was with autistic people with complex learning disabilities. My sister's experience of autism was with, well, basically people who reminded her of the younger brother she grew up with. So when I kind of fell upon hard times, she told me that, yeah, Chris, it will probably help you a lot to know that you're actually autistic. I don't think you know this yet. And then a year and a half later, I got my diagnosis, and yeah, I was extremely grateful for that diagnosis. It took me a little while to make peace with the fact that I was autistic, because basically, and this is another thing that I don't like about the way that autism is generally interpreted. The first thing the world teaches you about autism is that it's supposed to be a bad thing. I personally completely disagree with that, but I guess you could call me entirely biased on the matter. But yeah, once I got past the world's perception of autism and how you're supposed to feel negative about autism, I actually came to realize that, wait, actually, being diagnosed as autistic means that I'm actually not the wrong kind of person by not being like everyone else. I'm actually the person I was meant to be all along. And all of those efforts to try and change myself to be like other people, that was not fixing me. That was damaging me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's that's perhaps the best thing about finding out you're autistic / getting a diagnosis. The fact it does really help you to make peace with yourself. And I often say that everyone has to make peace with certain aspects of themselves. You might need to make peace with the fact that you'll never be the artist your mother was, or you might need to make peace with the fact that your big sister's always going to be better at spelling than you. Not in my case, because I wiped the floor with my sister when it comes to spelling. But if you're autistic, and or if you've been raised to believe that your deficiencies matter more than what you're actually good at, then there can be a hell of a lot to make peace with. And getting an autism diagnosis, but not just that, coming to appreciate yourself and your autistic strengths and the stuff that makes you a perfectly valid autistic person, that can be absolutely priceless. Very long answer to your question when I got diagnosed, but everything I've just said was worth saying, I think.
Oh yeah, and it's great because you just teed up like 12 different directions that I want to go in, and we'll see how far we get in the time that we have. But thank you for that great introduction and can of worms to all of the ways that either we don't.
I love opening cans of worms. It's so much fun.
Yeah, yes. We'll have Chris's contact information, everybody's contact information available afterwards. So you can go find those books. You can go learn more about everybody. We'll have all of that information at the end of the discussion. But thank you, Chris. I lastly want to introduce our last panelist, Carrie Magro. He's coming to us from New Jersey, so he's in our time zone locally for us, which is handier, I should say. And we're gonna share an introduction for him and have the rest of that conversation with Carrie.
Our next guest is an accomplished public speaker and activist who has devoted his life to helping others. Not bad for a guy who was completely nonverbal for the first few years of his life. But once Carrie Magro found his voice, he had a lot to say.
My parents have always told me I'm special, so why am I special? And then later on, I realized that I'm even more special because I have autism.
Carrie Magro's childhood was marked with rough patches. He was completely nonverbal at age 2 and diagnosed with autism at age 4.
I just remember having difficulties trying to explain myself to the world around me.
When Carrie did speak, he struggled to express himself.
Most of my memories were simply just about that kid who wanted to communicate with the world around him, but didn't have the verbal means of actually doing that.
His mother, Suzanne, remembers watching her son have a hard time adjusting to the outside world.
He turned 2 and he was scared of everything. He was scared of the water, he was scared of the rain.
But as the years went on, Carrie slowly began to find his words.
When you can't communicate with the people you love the most in this world about even some of your basic needs, it gets really, really tough. So, but luckily, once I started talking, I never stopped talking.
Carrie went on to graduate high school, attend Seton Hall University, and then independent living. Today, Carrie is a professional speaker, activist, and mentor dedicated to educating people about autism. Wow. This is at some point today. Carrie is currently finishing up his doctorate in education while also writing a children's book about autism acceptance in addition to his public speaking. Good for him.
Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here tonight to share with you a little bit about my story, but I love Autism Hub's topic for this evening because it's really true that we talk a lot more about our autistic community from the perspectives of those who have autism. I was diagnosed with autism, like the Today Show video mentioned, at 4 years old. The numbers of autism back then in 1992 were 1 in every 1,000 being diagnosed. Today, especially in the US, autism is the fastest growing developmental disability, impacting 1 in 54. And we need to have larger conversations about this because there's so many people in our community who need reliable autism supports across the lifespan. I certainly hope that I could leave you all tonight with just a better understanding of autism from a first person perspective, but also at the same time, I mean, I've known Chris from Autism Not Weird forever. This is the first time we're actually getting to chat on the same panel or event. And then Amber, it's just the video at the beginning was so tremendous. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit about their perspectives as well tonight. As a thank you to Autism Hub for having me as a panelist tonight, I'm going to be donating copies of all 3 of my books. Hopefully they can serve as a part of their resource library or simply for any families who want to learn a little bit more about autism. So for the past 10 years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with the National Speakers Association as one of the few autistic certified public speakers in the world. And it's given me the opportunity to travel the globe for the past 10 years, speaking at over 1,000 events about my journey. During that time, I went to so many conferences where people were like, Carrie, you need to write a book. So I wrote a book called Defining Autism from the Heart, based on self-advocacy. Because I started working with a lot of mentees who are young adults with autism. And I realized that a lot of them were having difficulties with disclosing their diagnosis, but also feeling ashamed about their diagnosis. And I have felt empowered. I consider autism as part of my superpower today, and it makes me part of who I am. So I wrote that book. I assumed it would be a nice Christmas present for my parents and my mentees, but within 3 days, it became an Amazon bestseller. It continued to give us a platform to continue writing books while traveling the country. We have a Facebook page as well, Carrie's Autism Journey, which now has 210,000 Facebook followers, where every single place we go to speak, we bring a tripod and a camera, and we sit down with self-advocates to highlight their stories. Because I can't tell you how many events I go to where I'm one of the only autistic people at these conferences. And I think some of the leading experts truly are those people who have that first person perspective. Along the way, and I have 22 seconds left, I love schedules, so I have a timer for my 5 minutes. I am an autism entertainment consultant today, getting to bring a realistic portrayal of autism to our entertainment industry, a nonprofit founder that's been able to provide life coaching and mentoring and scholarships for autistic students to go to college. And I'm really excited to be here tonight.
And we are very excited to have you. Beyond knowing Amber, just because we're from the same town, and we've been able to do a lot together. I met Carrie at a conference that he's one of the ones he's referring to. And he actually interviewed my son, who is a very new self-advocate. He was, I think, 10 at the time. He's 12 now. So we were one of the ones that was able to get set up with the tripod and have a good conversation. And how many hits are on that YouTube?
I think on Facebook he has around 35 to 40,000 hits. So yeah. It's incredible how much your own son has been able to inspire so many people. And I actually share his video in many of the events I go to. So he's not only bringing a smile on many people's faces around the country, but he's also becoming a young role model for so many in our community.
Which is just great. Yes. So welcome, Carrie and everybody. This is very exciting. I don't know if Chris and Amber, you guys can turn your videos on, and we're gonna just we're gonna get into this. There's so many things we want to talk about, but the topic specifically is talking about semantics in a neurodiverse world. I don't know if we can really get into that without explaining and maybe hearing from you guys about what neurodiversity is to you, what it means to you, and kind of being able to provide some sort of context for that. I first was introduced to the term, I think it was a couple years ago, which I think has been around the time that the whole diverse ability community has started moving beyond the awareness aspect. Like, for instance, this month is April. It's April Autism Acceptance Month. We've moved away from just trying to make people aware of who this community is and moving into really what acceptance looks like. So with that, can you guys give me your perspectives on what neurodiversity is? And Amber, I'll start with you if you want to default to Chris and Carrie. All of you, like with the questions I'm asking, I might be putting you on the spot. So if you want to just volley, like I'm gonna shuffle that over. Please do that. Do not feel, don't feel the need to have me put you on the spot. This is a discussion. So Amber, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I like to use the word diverse ability because I don't diss anybody's abilities. We all have abilities.
Yes. I like that.
Yes.
I like that. Chris, do you have thoughts? I mean, I know you have thoughts.
I think what's neurodiversity, like the definition of neurodiversity is the range of ways in which brains work. Autistic brains, dyslexic brains, neurotypical brains, ADHD brains, and so on. That's the definition. What it actually means is, I relate it to the progress of humanity. I am, call me completely biased, but I often look back at history and think that most things inventing that were worth inventing were either invented by an autistic person or a dyslexic person. And that's one thing that makes me think that really one of the key factors in human progress is the variety of brains that we have. If 100% of the brains in the human population were autistic, we wouldn't be as far as we are now. If 100% of the brains in the human population were neurotypical, we definitely wouldn't be as progressed as we are now. So really, it's not so much one particular neurotype being better than the other. I know I feel a bit of a traitor to my own kind saying this as part of team autism, but honestly, human progress depends on diversity of thought and being open to listening to people with alternative perspectives and alternative neurologies rather than just pathologizing them.
Great. Carrie.
Yeah, that was well said, Chris. I will honestly say, and you kind of explained it really well just then, but one of the things I will say is that neurodiversity in our movement has really, a lot of autistic people have kind of taken that over. But when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about a wide range of neurological conditions. We're not only talking about the autism community, and it's really about having that acceptance, that understanding, that appreciation of us as human beings more than anything else. So I think it's really important while we have these conversations, and there are amazing groups such as the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Autism Society of America, who really do a lot of justice around neurodiversity. One of the big initiatives for April this year was to pivot from Autism Awareness Month to Autism Acceptance Month. And I think the neurodiversity movement plays a large role of how that was possible. Those autistic people speaking out about this topic and others listening and really trying to make change, especially around the neurodiverse movement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like with the literature that I'm reading, I know that, you know, for those that are tuning in from all over the place, a movement like this is really, you know, it's pioneered through the internet for those that are not able to find each other. But I think you all are able to find each other a lot more if you consider, I think the CDC put in 2020 that it's 1 in 54 is now diagnosed with autism. That is a wide spectrum. And with that come a lot of questions from folks. And also as the population, as we understood, like I think Carrie, you'd mentioned that in 92, it was 1 in how many? What was the?
It was near 1 in 1,000 being diagnosed in the United States.
Being diagnosed, yes, which is that was the key thing there that I wanted to be able to wrap that around to. There's a new cohort generation that is growing up that are newly diagnosed, able to really take the embracing diagnoses and being able to find their own language and identity in that, which leads me to the next question, which really gets into the rest of the discussion about language, how we talk about the diversely abled community, how we talk to each other, how whether or not they are around, what identity first language is. And what some examples are is really, we're going to lay the framework for that and then really get into that as well. So with that, what is identity first language, and what are some examples of that? So Amber, I don't know if you want to start with what your thoughts are on that.
I think identity first language is, well, mostly not to talk down to them like they're children. Just talk to them like they're adults. They want to feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Talk to them like adults. So don't talk to them down to them, because that will make their self-confidence. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Do you have an example of that in your head when you're saying it?
I will share. One time this woman came over to work on like checkbook skills, and she talked down to me and like I was a baby, and I said, don't talk to me like I was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I had an example once of this one girl. This is when I graduated. I was going through my struggling hard time. This girl worked for Hope, and she was like a job coach, and she talked down to me and held my hand, and I didn't like that.
So in those moments where those things have happened, did you find that maybe when you were younger and still trying to come into your identity, you maybe were more passive with that? Like, is that something that you grew into over time, being able to have the confidence and courage in that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's when I graduated. I was like 19 at that time.
Mhm.
That's when my struggle time. I didn't want nobody to talk down to me like I was a baby.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Yes.
So those are good examples.
Mhm.
Chris.
Kind of similar to what said as to the last question, there's the definition of something, then there's what it actually means. The definition of identity first language is calling someone an autistic person rather than a person with autism. And what it actually means is, and I know that people have a variety of, even including on this panel, people have a variety of opinions on this. And also in my own history, I've had a variety of opinions as well. When I first started in autism advocacy, I used to switch between them both, person with autism and autistic person, interchangeably, because my argument is, when I was in the back of an ambulance with one of my students who had just had a huge seizure, the last thing on my mind was, oh, should I tell the paramedics he's autistic or has autism? Which one offends him less? With that said, my opinions have changed now. I'm now very much an identity first language person, and there's a couple of reasons that. First off, and this is the main point, the vast majority of the autistic community prefers it, so by default, it should be the one that we refer to. With that said, that doesn't mean that, well, the majority say autistic person, so everyone must say autistic person. It's like, ordinarily, my friends who call them, who'd ask do you call yourself disabled? They say, well, yes, I do call myself disabled because I don't think disability is a dirty word. So in front of them, I would use the phrase disability community. Mm-hmm. On a panel with Amber in it, I would say the diversibility, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's one of, yes.
Yeah, basically the answer is I would use the definition, the language that Amber chooses, because, well, she is the one who takes priority. So that's why it kind of annoys me when you get a usually well-meaning person who chooses to get offended on my behalf by saying, you shouldn't call yourself autistic, you're a person with autism. My counter argument is, I'm not a person with autism any more than I'm a person with left-handedness. I mean, I'm a left-handed person because I don't think of my left-handedness as a problem, as something that needs to be pushed to the back of the sentence. Like, don't worry, it's not a real part of me, really. And yeah, there's also an advocate that I know, Emma Dalmain. She works on, she does a lot of advocacy against autism cures, like chelation therapy, and basically chemical abuse of autistic children from people who have been persuaded into thinking it cures their autistic child. And one thing that she pointed out, which I've kept with me, is you won't find a single snake oil salesman or one of these people who claims to be able to cure an autistic person. But every single one of them will claim that they can cure a person with autism. If someone can be with autism, they can also be without autism. If someone is with autism, then surely that plants a seed in someone's mind that, I wonder if autism is this thing that can be taken away, because it's not really a part of them. So yeah, I think it's more important than ever. And this is me being entirely biased, but then again, you did ask my opinion about why we should say autistic person. And also, I've come to also see it as a sign of self-acceptance. If you see yourself, and other people will see it differently, but this is my perspective. When I saw myself as a autistic person, but also a person with autism, I wasn't anywhere near as accepting and as proud of my autistic identity as I have been in the years where I've started saying autistic person. So again, deliberately long answer to your question, but the proper definition of identity first language is autistic person. The meaning behind it is, in my opinion, a form of self-acceptance. Borderline pride, actually.
Yeah, which is what we want people to know exists. If they don't already know that there's a lot of pride to be had with your diagnoses.
Oh yeah.
Carrie.
So I'm actually curious, we have 24 attendees right now, just what your own perspective is on this as well. And as we're going along, I mean, I would love for you in the chat box to kind of I wrote in the chat like when we just started, but I'm actually curious just to hear more perspectives on this. So I would love if you would share your own perspectives. Obviously, identity first, again, is focused on autistic. Person first is person with autism. I grew up, everyone told me to use person with autism. Media was person with autism. Before I started a career in public speaking, I was working in digital marketing, And they would often say, do not use the word autistic. And I would be like, why? And they would say, because from a search engine optimization standpoint, autism gets more hits than the word autistic. And I just started to think about this and just like the whole concept of that. And it kind of blew me away that that was actually accurate. But that's why a lot of people were actually going into conversations about this whole, especially when I was growing up. This is why I kind of started getting interested between the debate between person with autism versus autistic. And now I consider myself autistic. But it was never a choice for me when I was growing up. It was always person with autism. And I feel like a lot of individuals, as they're growing up, are given the person with autism. I have gotten hate mail, bullying online, all based on the fact that I use the word autistic. And they say, Carrie, you should know better. You have a doctorate, and you calling yourself a person with autism when we know that you're a person first is not right. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's like, at the end of the day, regardless of what definitions we have for identity first, person first, one of the main themes I hope we can get across to the global autism community, the 70 million, over 70 million now worldwide who have autism, is that each autistic individual has the right to choose the language that they feel most comfortable with. I hope that as a society, and Chris gave a great just explanation of the definition already, but to end off this topic, I really think we need to allow individuals to decide for themselves and then not go into a tirade about, well, you shouldn't be saying that, but support them for who they are as individuals.
Yeah, and I think that is a great that's a great point to encourage people with, that, you know, in the same way that there's a lot of movements going on right now. There's a lot that's happened with the way that people identify in a lot of different ways, whether it's gender, you know, race, abilities. There are common themes throughout all of them that I've begun to pick up on, and it's really just the posture more than the politics. It's really a matter of being able to stay open, and when you meet somebody, ask them questions and be respectful in how they choose to be identified with. And if they say, I'm not really sure yet, being able to stay open and dialogue with them. If you are somebody who is a caretaker or a teacher or any other kind of provider, I think that is largely the audience that we have today. Being able to come alongside somebody and help them if they are trying to figure that out for themselves, or they say, maybe I've changed my mind. Like, we all do that, right? Like, it shouldn't be an offensive thing. It shouldn't be it's certainly not a new concept. And really being able to highlight how this is working with with this community it's happening here too. So that's great. That's a great first talk about what identity first and how semantics look. So with that too, if you consider, like, when you're walking around your towns, when you are talking to your caregivers, when you are in your worlds, like, where have you experienced that those rifts, I guess I should say? Like, where have you been able to see affirmation and validation versus marginalization or ableism, which for those that are not familiar with that, that's really the slogan that's mostly used with that is like nothing about us without us, not talking around or over people, really making sure that they're part of that conversation. It's not a group of me and other providers talking about neurodiversity in the movement. It's talking to you guys and letting you tell me what this movement is about as a caregiver and a provider. You know, I'm wanting to learn and grow all the time. So with that, like, how have you experienced that? Amber, I'll start with you again, ladies first.
I will experience that, like, for like responsive teachers, like with them like a bad attitude. Well, I had a teacher, like I said before, I had a teacher who my IEP experience, that I went into the IEP. This is when I was in school. I had no self-confidence. I always walked with my head down, was very shy, and I would say resident. And she talked about me like I wasn't there. And I was crying, and she asked why I was crying. But it's like, you talked about me when I wasn't there. But I also had other teachers that were encouraging. Like, I had the best teachers, like my teacher, Mrs. Wise, who was encouraging, and my teacher, Mrs. Cott, in elementary school, who was very encouraging. And that's what I have.
Yeah, IEPs, that's a big that's a big topic there.
Yeah.
Another can of worms, right? That's
Yes.
that's the whole thing. And there's a lot of perspectives happening there, and hearing a report about yourself while you're being present there, that's intimidating for anyone. If you consider, you know, us going into job performance evaluations, nobody's super eager to hear that, even if it's all great. You know, there's a lot of anxiety walking into that room because you're vulnerable. And that even for the strongest of advocates, you know, the strongest of understanding yourself. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot to walk into. And I think learning about that perspective from the individual versus and the child versus everyone else in the room, it's a great example of what that can look like on both ends. Chris.
So the question is, what's
Yes.
discrimination, or
how have you experienced, if you have experienced ableism and marginalization from
marginalization? That's the word.
Yes. Yeah, from providers, from caregivers, from educators. You know, choose your.
I suppose my experience is a little bit more subtle, but also more pervasive. When I qualified as a teacher, I was surrounded by people who always did the correct thing. They always followed the rules and everything like that. But for some reason, it just wasn't working for me as a mainstream primary school teacher. From the age of 14, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher for the rest of my life. So it was horrible when I actually got into the classroom, and despite me doing my absolute best, and also being the kind of teacher who focuses on building children's confidence and love of learning and so on, and getting people to really believe in themselves, which is why I went into teaching in the first place. For some reason, it wasn't working because of the way the system itself is designed, even though the people I was working with were fairly supportive. This is why it was a lot more subtle. The people who I was with were not mistreating me in any way whatsoever. They were doing their professional duty and following the various this, that, and the other. But the thing that bothered me was the way that the system itself was designed. So I left teaching forever in 2014. And then, well, these days I kind of sleepwalked back into the teaching profession, half without even realizing, because I started doing one-to-one tuition with students outside of school. Then one set of contacts linked me up with another set of contacts, linked me up with another set of contacts. And well, before I know it, now I'm a teacher again in a school specific for autistic students. And I'm beginning to make peace with the fact that I'm now actually good at my job. And it's
say more about that. What is
I know. I mean, are people allowed to think that they're good at their job without having some massive ego complex? But I'm very consciously aware that these days I am performing to my strengths. I'm being seen to play to my strengths, and also the students are getting a lot out of the way I teach as well. the kind of psychic link between us, autistic teacher, autistic students. It's just great. And also the thing that makes it work the most, other than the fact that the staff are very good at allowing their colleagues to play to their strengths, and they know where the strengths are, they know where the motivations are, and so on. But also the special education system itself is more autism friendly. It felt like when I was a mainstream teacher, I couldn't ever be an Ofsted rated outstanding teacher unless I pretended to be a neurotypical. Whereas the prevailing attitude in special education is, well, if it works for the students, then it works for the students. I mean, literally, that is the only goal. So I'm performing a lot better in environments that encourages a personal approach rather than one which, and this, I could expand the discussion for pretty much full 2 hours about the biggest problem with being autistic. It's nothing really to do with being autistic. It's the simple fact that the world has been designed with everyone else in mind.
Yes.
In primary schools, I don't know what elementary schools are like over there, but primary schools over here are filled with walls decorated with bright colors because all children love bright colors. The playgrounds and schoolyards are filled with loud noises because all children love making loud noises. And the teacher will occasionally say, oh, we got a surprise for you this afternoon because all children love being surprised and having their routine taken away and so on. But yeah, and when you go up the recruitment process and the workplace, are also places designed with everyone else in mind. And one of the most important things to come out of the autism advocacy movement is we're trying to make sure that the tide changes in our favor, that neurodiversity is valued rather than, well, assuming that because something works for the 98% of the non-autistic population, it should magically work for 100% of the population. So yeah, that's my experience with marginalization. It's a lot more subtle than someone saying, well, you're autistic, which means you can't do this. It's symptomatic of a system that is built without autistic people in mind.
Yes. Yes. Carrie.
Like Chris, I could spend 2 hours talking about this. What I will say, as some examples that come to the top of my head right away. The first one is when people think that I'm faking my autism diagnosis. I have gotten that pretty much consistently every single month since maybe 2009, 2010. And I am considered to have an invisible disability. Most people come up to me and they say, Carrie, you have autism, but you don't look it. You don't look like you have autism. And also, Carrie, you have autism, but you look so normal. So I think one of the biggest ones that I constantly get is me faking a disability. That to me is kind of one of the biggest definitions of ableism. Second biggest example goes into actually my line of work, and that is in the theater industry. I've had the opportunity to work on films such as Joyful Noise with Queen Latifah and Dolly Parton, based on a teen who's in it who has autism. Jane Wants a Boyfriend, which focuses on a young woman trying to find love who's on the autism spectrum. And then Mrs. Fletcher, a TV show on HBO, which focuses on a nonverbal character. And while all this is going on, I continue to talk about authentic representation. And then every single day for maybe 3 months, I would receive a question from parents asking me what they thought of Sia's new film Music. And for context, for people who don't know the movie,
Yes, please.
It's about a girl who magically finds the world, who's on the autism spectrum via this thing called music. And it was a very, very ableist movie, in my opinion, very ableist. They had a actor who was not autistic play an autistic character in the lead role, and actually did not actually give proper accommodations for the autistic girl that they were currently thinking about having be as part of the role. They said that it was too strenuous on her. And I think a lot about the whole topic of authentic representation when that comes. But if you're not reaching out to those with disabilities and people who love them and asking them their opinions on things, and then you create a movie, for example, based on the disability community without doing your research, that to me is one of the most shining moments of ableism within our community.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Got nominated for 2 Golden Globes though.
And nominated for 2
There
Golden
was.
Globes. And it has I think it won a Razzie recently also. Razzie being
A
the
well-deserved Razzie.
of the films. It has it still has an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes out of 100. 100 being good, 0 being run.
Yeah. And, you know, for further context, I'm going to proceed to throw myself under the bus for this next question as a parent, because I'm a well-intended, loving mother of 2 neurodiverse children. But I have been guilty of this for years as somebody who was aware, but not necessarily knowing how to be better accepting. How do you guys feel about the terms high functioning and low functioning? Amber?
I would say high functioning. I feel like a high functioning, because we all can be high functioning, because we all are high functioning on things. And high functioning is for those who have like an intellectual disability, and non-functioning is like for those that are like, say, like nonverbal, or like people that are like really low verbal, but like can't have trouble learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Labels.
Thanks. How does it feel when somebody talks about you on your level of functioning?
Bad.
Yeah.
It makes you feel less confident in yourself when people say that stuff, because it doesn't make you feel good, because we all like good compliments, but that doesn't really make you feel good inside.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree. Chris.
Well,
Can I repeat the question? How do you?
Oh no, I know exactly what the question was. I remember exactly what the question was. It's just okay, deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
Things with me, I have a mathematics degree and I can solve a Rubik's Cube, and I'm on 3 novels and counting. I am very high functioning, except when I'm not. And that little fact gets very much glossed over. And I wish I could remember for the life of me which advocate it was who said this. But the quote is, the problem with being high functioning is that your challenges are ignored or assumed to not exist. And the problem with being low functioning is that your strengths are ignored or just assumed to not exist. And perhaps the best way I can demonstrate this from my professional history is I once worked in a special school which had 2 different sites, one of which had students with very complex, profound learning disabilities. And the other block had students who were very similar to me when I was at their age, except some had some form of what other people might call mild academic learning difficulties, but people who might be able to pass formal examinations. To be frank, most of them didn't have any kind of learning difficulties. They were just bullied out of mainstream education. Mm-hmm. Now, other people might say, oh, so there's a low functioning block and a high functioning block. But I often have to remind people to be very wary of self-fulfilling prophecies. If you take a low functioning student, then say, oh, okay, well, this person's low function, so we won't teach them how to cook because they're not going to understand it. We're not going to teach them how to dress themselves. We're not going to teach them personal hygiene because they're not going to understand it. And we're certainly never going to even enter the realm of talking about them getting a job because they won't manage it. And then 10 years later, student leaves school, unable to dress themselves with no personal hygiene skills, can't cook, and oh, isn't autism such a terrible thing that's been done to that person? When really, a lot of the time, an autistic person or anyone with neurological conditions, etc., whatever you want to call it, often the biggest setback doesn't come from the disability or diverse ability. It comes from the obstacles put in people's ways by people who get to choose what you learn and what you don't learn. Anyway, so that was one of my sites where I had students with complex learning disabilities who, looking back, I can see the limits that other well-meaning staff members were placing upon them. Once in a while, I also fell into the trap of doing this. It is so easy to fall into. Yeah. And then on the other side, there were students who only really entered special education after they tried to kill themselves. But don't worry, they're high functioning, so they've got no problems. So yeah, that's my opinion about that.
Yes. Carrie.
So it's really tough because I hate functioning labels altogether. The debate I get with so many parents online about and who message me is, how do I get my child extensive services if I'm not specifically mentioning their level? I've never considered autism linear. I've liked to call it a wheel of different traits and different strengths, different challenges. That makes autism a lot easier to kind of understand, because I would be considered high functioning when it comes to speech. I'm a public speaker, I talk at events, but in terms of the sensory challenges I still deal with today, and especially during times like the COVID-19 pandemic, routine change has never been easy for me. Transitions have never been easy for me. So I would be considered quote unquote low functioning when it comes to that. So I think we just as a whole need to separate ourselves from those functioning labels. I've had several self-advocates talk about doing high support needs versus low support needs. But the problem with that also is that there are going to be times where somebody is going to need high support needs versus when they're going to need low, when they're having a meltdown, for example, versus when they're not necessarily having a meltdown. So I think as a society, if we're not specifically pushing for supports, this is kind of the doctor's MO. It's like, if you want your child to get supports, you have to say, my child is this. When I really wish our society could get to the point where we could say, and I think Chris has a quote, he created a meme about this. It's like, let's just talk about the individual's strengths and challenges and just call them by their name, and then just list the strengths and challenges versus throwing a label on them that might not be part of their identity.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually really hard to not just fill a bunch of slides with all the quotes that I know all of you have said. and the things that other people have said that are like, that is so much better than what I've either been doing or what I've been saying. Or, I know for providers, there's a lot of systematic things that have to go on. And I know as educators, there's a lot of boxes they have to check in figuring that out. And a lot of times you can't, what can you do within the confines of you being able to be an advocate? If we can't change the education system, which we're not here to talk about how specifically you can do that. If you can't change the way that all of society is, how can you change how conversations and dialogue happen in the clinic you're in the classroom you're in? How can you be more of that culture change agent in learning from what is the better alternative to say? If we're not talking about functioning, and we don't want to dismiss the supports that are needed. We don't want to acquiesce and just gloss over and say everything is fine all the time, because nothing's fine all the time with anybody, you know. There are days that I wish I could say I'm, you know, if I have a mental illness issue with depression, you know, we call those personal days now, you know, and we get to gloss that over. But really, if I'm saying, well, my brain is functioning well today, or it is not functioning well today, when it comes to this, I don't have to throw my label out there to explain anything. So why should you? You know, like, why should we say, oh, you're having, you know, when we say your autism's coming out more, you know, I know for my son, I've had experiences where they're like, well, he sometimes the autism comes out, but then we'll make sure we moderate that. And it's just this idea of like, so when he's having the issues, that's the autism. Is that what you're implying? You know, like, well, that's an interesting way to see this. So that's, you know, those are one of many different examples of what that can look like. I don't know, Chris, you were ready to say something, say it.
Yeah, but based on that, all the autism comes out. Is that basically symptomatic of the attitude of, okay, we're fine with someone being autistic as long as it doesn't really stand out. The moment someone's different, oh, that's their autism coming out. But don't worry, that we can address that. We can make them normal again. But also that kind of triggered a thought in my head, an observation that I made recently, that in the minds of some people, autism is such a bad by default kind of thing that if a person in general struggles with something, then, well, okay, fair enough, they're struggling with it. If an autistic person struggles with it, they're struggling because of their autism. But if someone is succeeding, whether it's me getting a master's degree and solving a Rubik's Cube, in the minds of these people, oh, wow, Chris can solve Rubik's Cube despite his autism. No, I'm succeeding because of my autism. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, it's kind of a reflection on the anti-autism attitude that you find out there. The fact that if an autistic person struggles, they're struggling because of their tragic autism. If an autistic person succeeds, including if their autistic traits and characteristics help them succeed, they're succeeding despite their autism.
So for the behavioral specialists out there, for the therapists out there specifically, you know, when you are addressing and talking to somebody about some, and really like even the behavioral specialist issues and the ways that people are able to identify like what is considered a behavioral problem. If you consider stimming a behavioral problem, we've got a lot of problems. You know, if we don't let people flap freely so that they can focus, if we don't allow people to play with their stimming and sensory things in order to be able to exist in the same room as so many other things, that there's a lot of other obstacles. So I think I'm picking up on a theme here in what you guys are saying, that there's really if you do not masking, that's the next thing that I'm thinking about, is masking with what it looks like when you're trying to, what happens when you are subliminally and very loudly marginalized, is that you after a while try to mask who you are in order to fit the world around you. Have you guys experienced that? Because again, this is me kind of living vicariously through the little beings in my house. But like speak to me about maybe perhaps what masking it looks like for you, and how that feels, and when you take your mask off, where it leaves you. Amber, did that question even make sense?
Just pass.
Okay.
I pass on that question.
Yeah. Because I don't even know how I asked it. I don't. Should I say it a different way, Chris?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
You want me to?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, one thing about masking that is often kind of underappreciated is the sheer energy that it takes. I mean, autistic people after a day of pretending to be neurotypical, get back from work or get back from school, and then that's basically them gone for the rest of the day. Now, for me, I've already spoke a bit about me being a mainstream teacher, and so perhaps the most painful years of that was me being a substitute teacher. And for self-esteem reasons, that kind of sucked because it meant, well, yeah, I was qualified as a teacher, but I wasn't a real teacher like all these people who had succeeded and definitely never had any problems ever. And also didn't have this thing called autism. Notice the person first language there, because that's how I saw it. And yeah, also one of the reasons why it wasn't working out professionally either was because I was teaching other people's classes using other people's lesson plans that they had planned with their neurotypical brains. I was basically, personally and professionally, I was doing impressions of neurotypical people because I was taught that that's how you succeed. And yeah, not only was it exhausting, but also it didn't work. I literally could not be normal if I tried. And believe me, I've really tried. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. One of the great things about the diagnosis is it helped me to at least recognize, don't get me wrong, I carried on doing it because I was told I was supposed to, but at least helped me to recognize that trying to turn myself non-autistic wasn't fixing me. It was damaging the person I was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, we've all got to get paid. And if that involves pretending that you're not autistic, and also it's not just about the money, because well, substitute teaching job didn't get me paid that much. It's about the self-esteem side of it. It's I spent half of my life to that point trying to be a teacher, and I'll take what I can get. And if the secret to achieving this lifelong dream is to essentially pretend to not be autistic, then I guess that's just what I'm going to have to do. I'd like to hope that these days, well, the thing is, I work in special education, so I never have to pretend to be non-autistic ever again, and it's such a relief. But I'd like to think that we're pushing the world in the direction where not only can people start talking openly about being autistic, including in schools, in fact, I'd say especially in schools, because we've definitely got autistic students in schools these days. We're not keeping silent about that, but also autistic strengths might actually be appreciated, as well as just, oh yeah, that is an autistic person.
Exactly. Carrie, what are your thoughts?
So for everyone watching at home, I included a great link. So we got to highlight Emily's son, Heath. And I remember when as soon as you brought it up, I was remembering that he specifically mentioned a topic where he was dealing with burnout because of masking. I think we need to make sure that we are helping people understand what masking can potentially look like. For me, my masking that I do more often than not is I still stim to this day. And I think it's important to note that all of us stim, even in minor ways. My stimming is moving my hands back and forth, especially when I'm public speaking. You can't see because my hands are below the camera. However, I use it as a way of self-regulating for myself. And for other people, they may twirl in circles. They may do a lot of different things. And I think for me, masking, when we talk about the behavior end, we need to embrace autism acceptance, because one thing for sure, and I get a lot of debate with parents about this, is applied behavioral analysis, where they specifically say, a lot of autistic self-advocates say that because they received ABA, they were turned into a robot where they just mask everything and go through long periods of time with burnouts. And that's usually typically when I hear the most about masking in our community, when it's the debate on whether or not ABA is right for my child. And ABA has actually made leaps and bounds compared to what it was when it just started. Now, many people call ABA reformed ABA because it's definitely made leaps and bounds compared to when it was just founded. So I think it's important when we have this conversation about masking, we understand some of the reasons why individuals mask, one being because they want to be that quote unquote normal, and they're worried about being bullied, bullying being a big reason why a lot of the kids I work with mask. And also just making sure that we're having these conversations about invisible disabilities as well. Because some people who have autism don't want to have that quote unquote invisible disability. They just think that they'll be able to survive better in the world by trying to mask as many things as possible.
Yeah. And there's a lot of new studies coming out talking about how what depression and ID or any sort of intellectual disability look like together. There's a lot of underdiagnoses of it, and thankfully they're beginning to get better about that. But I really think that there is a direct correlation, whether somebody else has not done the study yet or not, and maybe you guys know, the correlation between masking and depression, especially over time. There's no way that masking is going to make you become more secure as a person, for anybody, for anybody that's being put in a role that they don't necessarily want to be in, but feel obligated to be in. Sometimes that happens for us with our family. Like, you can get pressure from family to be a certain way, from parents that are well-intended or not. And then you try to pretend to do that as a young adult and realize quickly, like, this isn't what I want to do. It's the same sorts of things that are going on with your idea of identity, and seeing that, like, we got to stop pressuring people to mask.
Yeah. Emily, one thing, sorry, Chris, you go ahead first.
No, because I'll probably go on for about 5 consecutive minutes, so you go first.
No, the only thing I was going to say is, while we're having these conversations, it's also important to know that more studies are coming out on the differences between girls and boys when it comes to masking. Because for a while we had the quote unquote Rain Man disorder, where everyone thought that somebody with autism was white, was a boy, and great at math, and could win you a lot of money at blackjack in Vegas. And now we realize that we've actually moved the diagnosis rate from 1 to 5 boy to girl to 1 to 4, which means less girls are falling through the cracks. But studies have been indicating recently that girls are able to mask better than boys. I don't know if this will continue to be a trend we see in our society. However, I think it's important to discuss different genders and how they look, and in terms of masking overall.
Yeah, based on what you said, Emily, about the importance of authenticity. The therapists I know, and therapists in general, use a word called congruence, which is a way of describing how well what you do reflects who you are. For example, if you're a very shy, introverted person, but your job involves standing up in front of large audiences and doing things that extroverts are supposed to do, then that will be what's called incongruence, because there's a mismatch between who you are and what society expects you to do, or what your employer expects you to do. So yeah, even if you take autism out of the equation, incongruence is widely recognized as a factor in affecting people's mental health. But of course, with a lot of things that apply to the general population, it's amplified when it comes to autism. The fact that the incredibly vast majority of autistic people do mask. And since ABA was brought up, while Kerry was talking about ABA, I found a tweet that I retweeted a little while ago from someone who's been through ABA. And yeah, this has stuck with me ever since I read it. A couple of tweets. First person says, "You know what ABA gave me? Immense guilt every time I give myself a reward without completing a task first. And by rewards, I mean things like going to the bathroom, eating, doing anything other than keeping my body very still." And this is the one that really hits me. What ABA gave me? As a child, I developed the warped inner voice of a child psychologist before I developed my own inner voice. And I still can't get rid of it. And a bit of a trigger warning for the next one about sexual abuse. What ABA gave me? A susceptibility to sexual trauma because I had no clue what was okay, and I've been trained to believe others before myself. As an educator, I have huge safeguarding concerns with relation to ABA. I was in India a couple of years ago talking to trainees who because the autism scene is still kind of growing in India, naturally they're looking to the countries who have, generally speaking, more experience in helping autistic students. And yeah, despite this, they're going to America anyway. And yeah, sorry, not sorry. So obviously they've been advised, yeah, ABA must be the way forward.
Yeah.
And I had to quite shamelessly stand up in front of trainee Indian psychotherapists and say, okay, if something like ABA must happen, the child absolutely, unconditionally, non-negotiably must be given a choice to say no, or I'm uncomfortable, or I don't like this, or you know what, I can't be bothered. Because if something is non-negotiable, if the child must do this in order to get their toy back, which I think is a bloody disgusting way of performing therapy, let's take away something they love and only give it back if they comply with my demands. Even if you dress it up with nice voice and things, it is still desperately manipulative. And try not to swear here. Oh yeah, I can use British swear words because I'd say that's a complete load of bollocks, which you can't say in front of British audiences, but I can say in front of American audiences. But yeah, changing the tone back to what it was, I have huge safeguarding concerns about the way ABA is practiced, because if the child has no opportunity to say no, or I've had enough, or I don't feel comfortable, or if they do say it and they get ignored, or it's written down as defiant behavior, then I promise the main thing that the child is taking from that session is that they must always do whatever an adult tells them, even if it makes them feel deeply uncomfortable. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on that because I'm sure you've got an imagination, but what's going to happen the next time, including as an adult, when someone who they perceive to be some kind of authority figure tells them to do something they're uncomfortable with. So yeah, that's my opinion about well, I could name ABA, but it's basically any kind of compliance therapy. Anything which does not give a child an opportunity to practice self-advocacy shouldn't be called therapy, in my opinion, as an educator, admittedly not as a therapist.
So that helps round into the last portion of what I really wanted to be able to talk to you guys about, which is like, when is a disability not a disability? And can you guys redefine, like, how can we be better? And I'm saying we, me, not you guys, but like, how can I be better? And how can caregivers and providers be better advocates? And this isn't saying that they aren't doing it. Like, I know that people are working within the confines that they have. You can go globally with this. You can go specific with this. It's all going to be helpful to hear. But, you know, Amber, I'll start with you again if you want to answer. Like, how can your caregivers be better for you? How can they be more inclusive?
I think they can be more inclusive. Take them out in the community amongst other people, get them socialized, and encourage them to be the best they can be, and encourage them and be helping to them out in the community. I'd like take them to like our Bible study, take them to like your Superstars class, or take them to the Y work on machines. Like, get them out in the community and meet people. Like, because we all know that meeting people is not from the four walls of your home. You have to go out in the community and meet people, interact with them, make friends. That's how you get involved in things.
Yeah, and be a friend, you know, for us to be a friend, to say, Amber, I want to go see a movie, you know, you want to come along, you know, instead of shying away, which I know we're in a pandemic. So, you know, it's been even harder. And that's a whole other thing. It's been a lot harder. It's going to take all the progress we've made with employment. It's going to take even longer to get back to even where we were, you know, with that, because everybody's digressed in every sector. But this sector is no different for that. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's great.
Yes.
That's great advice. Chris?
The question being, how best do we help autistic people just come in general, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, in holding this event, you're doing the main thing anyway, which is listening to us. And just continue listening. And so I'm not one of those people who thinks that autistic people should be the only people to talk about autism, because I think, well, first off, we're not in a position to be throwing away allies. But also, there are non-autistic people who can share valuable insights about their personal or professional experience of autism. But it should be autistic people who are at the front leading this, which historically it simply hasn't been. Again, it's one of those things where the tide is turning in the right direction, whereas, or Kerry was saying before, even to this day, there are occasionally events where there's only one token autistic speaker, but that's becoming less and less acceptable. I don't know if that's your experience, Kerry, but so over here in Britain, that's kind of mine, where it's, yeah, that's the thing about tides. They do turn, but they turn very slowly. Nonetheless, they do turn. But yeah, listen to us, value us, and please, please, please don't try to correct our experiences. If your autistic child's experience is different to us, well, that's because autistic people differ to each other for the same reason that non-autistic people differ to each other. It's almost like we're our own individual people with our own individual experiences, our perspectives, opinions, beliefs, and so on. So yeah, it's very inconvenient to the powers that be, but what works for one of us isn't going to work for all of us. But the very least people can do is listen to what works for us as individuals.
Yes. Carrie, what do you want to add?
Yeah, no, honestly, for me, when we look at disability, I mean, Amber kind of talked about it already, but we also need to encourage the ability. I know sometimes we hear that over and over in inspirational quotes and in memes and everything. And I know that for many in our community, we just need to celebrate differences within our community. I think that's one of the most important things. We need to educate that obviously if you met one individual, you met one individual. We often talk about my friend Stephen Shore, who is autistic and a public speaker. He says if you met one individual with autism, you met just that one individual with autism. But isn't that everyone? Everyone has their own unique DNA that they're going to bring to this world, their own strengths and challenges. Some, I mean, need more care than others. I mean, I know so many families who come up to me and they say, I cannot not call my child's disability a disability because they're going to need 24/7 care for their entire life, and they're not going to be able to find employment, not going to be able to do post-secondary. And I think it's really important that we just, as a community, just try to provide the best quality of life for everyone. I mean, I think of the diversity movement, and I feel like so many of the topics that are being promoted, universal healthcare, for example, are something that not only individuals with disabilities need, but many individuals within our community. So let's kind of try to take away the whole aspect of disability and kind of move it towards more of the line of thinking of diversity. In addition to that, that's where I see a lot of issues in terms of employment. I see people who call their department in human resources diversity and inclusion, but then they have a different department for disability, which doesn't make any sense to me. Diversity is disability, disability is diversity. So that's my 2 cents.
I think at the beginning of one of the presentations I heard from you, there was a quote that stuck out to me, because I know that this happens to well-intending folks, is that, you know, they'd be more willing to make somebody that's diversely abled their prom queen or king,
Yes. Yeah.
but then not actually interact with them. You know, they will highlight and put somebody on a pedestal, but not actually know how to relate and befriend and be include. That is not inclusion. I think that's another thing to highlight it. You know, you don't need to be above, you know, you need to be with. You don't need to be around, you don't need to be pushed aside, you know, be included. That's what inclusion looks like. It's not being hailed as this you know, anything above the rest, winning popularity contests. It's about being asked to go out. You know, Amber, I think that that's really, you know, when you were saying that, I was thinking that a lot.
Yeah. As autistic people, we don't want, okay, fine, as the phrase goes, everyone wants to rule the world, but we don't want to conquer the world as autistic people, generally speaking. We just want a level playing field.
Yeah.
We want a world that has been designed with us in mind as well.
Right.
We don't want better or worse, we want equal.
Right.
Me and Beyonce. Beyonce wants the girls to run the world. I just want anyone who wants to run the. I have to say that in the disability community, I say who runs the world. Hopefully, one day, individuals with disabilities.
Well,
go
who
ahead.
runs Silicon Valley? You know, like who runs
True.
who runs the front of lines in engineering for hybrid vehicles? You know, who helped invented all of these things? Who invented MC, you know, squared? You know, like how have we made so much progress? You know, it's been by a group of neurodiverse people.
I often find it very ironic that neurodivergent people are often very, very good at coming up with the inventions that make the world a better place, but we're pretty terrible at getting the jobs that involve us using these things. It's like I got my first teaching job on the 13th interview, and it's not because I was a crap teacher. It's because I didn't know how to play the game when it came to the recruitment system. In fact, it was pardon the language, but about a week ago, I saw an old Facebook memory from about 10 years ago, which where I actually said, I think autistic job candidates should get bonus points for not knowing how to bullshit their way through the interview process. Because in about half of those failed interviews were silver medals. And I suppose at the time, coming second in a job interview is kind of like coming second in the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
For all the difference it made, you might as well have come last. But the general response, I was saying this a few days ago, the general response was, wow, Chris will make a great teacher and I hope he gets a job somewhere. Which when you've heard a dozen groups saying that, it's like, well, why didn't you do it? Oh, yeah, sorry, there was another candidate who just sat down and gave the correct answers. So we hired them instead.
So that's a good charge. You know, the autism acceptance, you think that we're doing that well? We're not. We're aware, we're not accepting. If in the US you have if somebody has autism, they have a 70% chance of being unemployed, with or without
I think it's 80% over here. But
yeah,
it could be up to 90 here. Yeah. It's crazy.
That's like some employment, you know, or whatever, and relying on our bureaucratic system to aid in that should not be the main thing. You know, we should not be relying on the OVR to make it all happen. We should have communities that are inclusive. If we had inclusive communities, this wouldn't be the problem that it is.
And I would say that with the autism, it's like we all have gifts. Like it's like they have gifts and they want to show their gifts. Like if I know someone who works at Clay Peelings, he loves working with reptiles. And I have one, like I said, has autism and he works in a doctor's office. He loves animals and he takes pictures. And they're showing their gifts.
Yeah. And
they're showing what they love. Like I show what I love, and because we have an inclusion class at the Y, like some of those from like day programs, like Hope, like some of their hab workers would bring them, and it's cool, and it's like they're engaging. It's like people in the class are engaging, like talking to them, becoming friends, that's what we want. That is what all the individuals want. Because then when I was in school, because I always have friends of mine, I always have people in my classroom who are very inclusive of me, and I have a friend of mine, Brielle Schreider, and and of us at graduation, she was always inclusive of me, and that's very special.
It is. It goes a long way.
Yes.
So we are doing great on time, guys. I just have to say it is like 6:30 on the nose, which means it's what time for you, Chris? It's 11:30.
Half 11.
Okay, yeah, half 11, but that's great. So we have the rest of this time to invite any of the attendees. We're gonna like open this up to more of a Q&A time. So if you can, I know that we've had some chats going on here, which is great. If you want to put in some questions that you have for folks, we can answer that. I know I'll look through here and see if there are questions that have already been asked, because I've been just really focused on hearing you guys. So Taylor asked, what would you have responded well to from your teachers growing up? And we can, you guys want to just like, if you have a response, we don't need to keep the order of operations here. If one of you just wants to throw your hand up and answer, we can try that since it's late in the hour, and why not?
Carrie, I mean, I think of just like so many easy ways of just going up. I think it doesn't have to be a lot of different terminology. I think having the idea that you want to be kind and you want to be direct, because I feel like a lot of the times, especially in our school systems, we sometimes use fake language, and being direct and keeping an open line of communication with me, especially when I was in school, would have been tremendously helpful. Also written descriptions as well. That would have been really helpful from teachers versus saying it once and then maybe something going over my head.
Anybody else have a thought?
I would like to say positive attitude and encouragement, not intimidation, not talking down to me, like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Try to encourage them and be the best they can be. Like Chris, you probably do that as a teacher. Encourage them to be the best they can be, and tell them your story and that they can relate to you.
Chris doesn't do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, of all the things that I've given to the internet over the last 6 years, the thing that's been quoted the most as saying that the quote of mine that's gone around the internet most is basically my attitude towards education when it comes to autistic students. I am not trying to turn an autistic person into a non-autistic person. I'm trying to turn an autistic person who struggles into an autistic person who does not struggle.
Mm.
That's why I can really contribute to this question. The importance of helping people to not just get good at stuff academically, but come to a better understanding of who they are and how to become their best selves, as Amber just said.
Yeah, great. Yes. Brooke asked, do you think there are different feelings about identity first language based on the diagnosis?
Yeah, probably. If I was doing some research into proper language usage when thinking about underdogs. I mean, I know my perspective on autism front and back, obviously, but one of my characters, Simon, he's got Down syndrome, so I needed to do some research on what the preferred language is, and also, is it Down'(S) syndrome or is it Down syndrome? And apparently there's a difference between America and Britain. So obviously I chose the British version, A, because the story takes place in Britain, and B, this is how the language is supposed to be spoken. But yeah, with Down syndrome, the general consensus is it's person first language, and with a bunch of differences, it's person first. I think autism is one of the rare ones where the majority prefer identity first. So it really does. Yeah, I think the answer to that question is yes. It does depend on the diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with Chris. It does, and they're going to be, and for ASD in the United States, it's the DSM-5 now. So they'll throw you on a level 1, level 2, level 3. Typically, I see a little bit of a change in conversation when I talk to parents if their child has level 3 autism versus level 1 autism. But at the end of the day, I think, again, it just depends.
Mm.
Is level 4 the final boss?
Absolutely. I got the cheat codes.
Yeah. There it is. I knew we'd get geekier as the night went on. It was bound to happen.
Oh, what gave you that impression?
I don't know. I have no idea. So here's another one. This is actually more of a comment, but I think it kind of ties in with, you know, the bounds of identity language. Dr. Bay said bio-individuality, which is great. Just even using that word right there. Bio-individuality should be celebrated and recognized more in health. I think those unfortunate, quote, high functioning and low functioning, unquote, terms come from necessary evil of billing codes used in a medical setting. You're forced to code for insurance based on level when it comes to, quote, disabilities, unquote. And those codes determine what kind of insurance coverage will be provided to the patient. Again, brings up another huge issue with how we are categorizing and systematically working through all of these things. But I think that I would say that, you know, a lot of that clinical language kind of just bleeds in, you know, and there's so many things to focus on there. Does anybody have any thoughts on that too? I guess it's not really a question, but.
I may not be the best person to comment on it because obviously I'm not American, but speak as someone who lives in a country with a national health service, I'm very glad that the impact of insurance companies isn't really a big impact here. That I'm even aware of ABA practitioners who don't practice traditional ABA because they recognize how harmful it is, but they call what they do ABA so that it falls under insurance providers terms, et cetera, and yeah, we probably should be Kerry and Amber who answer this with regards to insurance. I think that things become a lot less complicated when you have a national health service, because you can, to a greater extent, see how things for what they really are without the feeling of an insurance company looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, I would just say to Dr. Bay, and that's a great comment. I was reading the comments throughout the night, and some of you have just some amazing feedback and questions. For me, that's why I mentioned in my explanation about the linear scale of high functioning and low functioning, how sometimes in terms of getting supports, our doctors talk about the fact that we need to put that quote unquote label to get services. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I would prefer that we get to a point in our system where we are able to have larger conversations around just the name of the individual and the strengths and weaknesses. But I know that's kind of like a pipe dream for right now in 2020. We're trying to move from Autism Awareness Month to Autism Acceptance Month in April. I mean, look at like doing something like that. It's going to take a lot of work, but I think I definitely think we can make leaps and bounds moving forward, especially when it comes to grassroots movements towards making positive change.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that's going to be, you know, policy changes happen based on conversations and getting involved in that, and getting, you know, your local leaders to hear and listen to that and see the benefit to everybody when you have that. It's, you know, somebody commented about how so much of this conversation is parallel with conversations I've had with a good friend who is blind from birth. You know, like this, again, it's why, you know, Amber doesn't identify as autistic, but she's a part of this panel. It's this idea of like, these are not isolary issues. These are very universal conversations. It's just bringing in, you know, autism into those larger global things and to be considered, you know. Amber, did you have a thought?
Well, because I normally, as I introduce myself, I normally say I have an intellectual diverse ability because I had a brain injury at birth. But I normally, like I said earlier, I don't diss anybody's ability. Like because I don't I never say that I don't judge my ability because, well, anybody's ability, because we all have abilities.
Right.
That's what
Right.
I do that.
Exactly. There's another question here from Heather. What are your thoughts on the use of social stories? What about the redirection of stimming? I look at this more as self-regulation.
About the redirection of stimming, my very first immediate question when everyone talks about redirecting stimming is, why are you doing this? For example, thank you, Gary, if the redirection of stimming is because, well, they're doing something that actually aggravates them even more, or if the stimming when they get angry is repeatedly hitting themselves on the head, obviously you do want to redirect that. But if it looks like this and it just looks a bit weird, then, well, why would you want to redirect that? Why is the problem with them rather than society in general? The thing is, it was mentioned earlier, everyone stims. Now, some people stim by going, tapping foot, and this is seen as normal. Autistic people might stim like, and that is seen as weird. I stim like this, and that makes me look really bloody clever. So really, it's just different expressions of humans physically meeting their own needs, and really, I see it as society's problem rather than the autistic individual. But yeah, that's my opinion about the redirection of stimming. If the act of stimming is actively harming the person, then yes, redirect the hell out of it. But always ask yourself, why do I actually want to redirect this stimming? What is the benefit for them? So that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, I will say that, again, I mentioned earlier, we all stim, even very minor, very, very minimal stim. As long as the stimming is not self-injurious to them or in terms of injurious to somebody else, then I have no qualms with it. It's a way, again, of self-regulating, like you mentioned. Second part of that, social stories, I love social stories. I love social stories. I love visual schedules. I think the more preparation for these kids, the better, especially when it comes to structuring things before they're put into a situation, and also personalizing the social stories. I can't tell you how many children I've interacted with who have had meltdowns because they have a social story where they have to put themselves in the shoes of other people that the social story was created for. That is why groups such as there's some great resources at teachers.com. You could get social stories for $1. But it's important to customize it based on the individual, because then they have the perspective of the ownership principle, where they take ownership of the story and therefore are more likely to be self-motivated, for example, going to the grocery store for the first time. They see themselves in the story and they want to portray the story versus seeing somebody else do it.
Taylor just mentioned that some call this the so what test in terms of stimming. Okay, yeah.
Oh, in addition to that, I just remembered a meme that made for Facebook. I think it's based on something I said completely impulsively while I was doing a speaking engagement once. It was one phrase that I absolutely hate with a passion is the make autistic children indistinguishable from their peers, as if that's some kind of bloody achievement. But yeah, in relation to the so what test and in relation to what I was saying earlier about what other people have decided acceptable is, do you know how to make stimming autistic children indistinguishable from their peers? Make the non-autistic children flap too. Why not do that?
Yeah.
I will add just one component of this. As my doctorate was in educational technology leadership, and I could go on for hours about universal design of learning. We need to get our kids up and engaged and about. I see a lot of kids struggle in school when they're sitting down. Well, not necessarily during COVID-19, but before, sitting in lecture style for hours and hours on end in school. That is a total disservice, because when these kids are actually moving around, there is going to be more minor stemming granted for individuals who don't have autism, versus when they're just sitting down and being structured. Stemming is a lot more obvious to people, which can lead to that bullying, and for people to kind of take notice of that. So
Yeah.
just my 2 cents.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any other, going back through here and reading. Yeah, the comments on labels, you know, people having strengths and weaknesses, and that's the beauty of being human. It's like, yes, that's great. This is exactly right. Liz Kammer wrote, which, you know, she's my sister. She's out. She works for a sister provider similar to what Hope does for folks with IDD out in the Denver area. It seems like doctors' offices and hospitals have no education or experience with ID and DD members of the community. How can I help advocate better when my clients are in an appointment or at the hospital? This is that's a big issue too.
So, well, first, Amber, Chris, I feel like I might go off on a tangent on this, so I'll let you guys have the floor first.
I've been doing that all night, so it's fine.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see your link here already to IBCCES, which is I wondered if that plug was going to come in eventually for that particular training group.
So I wrote a letter to open letter to ER and medical professionals from my perspective. And I can't tell you how many groups I have seen that have actually been able to succeed with continuing education on topics around autism and other disabilities. I serve on the board of a group called IBCCES, who do certified autism centers, where they train employees on how to be more accommodating for their patients who have autism, other travel industries as well. The Sesame Place was kind of like our most popular one, because Julia was one of the first Muppets with autism ever. And we made Sesame Place go have the CAC in Pennsylvania, where some of you are from. So I think it's important where we're having those continuing education opportunities, as well as there was a statistic that shocked me that said that those who are autistic are 8 times more likely to go to the ER room and 52 times more likely to go to a doctor here in the United States. And a lot of that sometimes is because of the meltdowns, the challenging behaviors, which might lead to self-injurious behaviors. This is why also first responders going to individuals' houses for autistic individuals, we don't have a lot of statistics on it right now, but it continues to be more popular than their non-disabled peers. So I think continuing education is a must.
And to do that, I mean, I'm actually talking to the city of Williamsport here about with IBCCES ways that we can become a more sensory-friendly city. And there actually is great response. I'm finding, like, if you go to these folks, it's not that they are not willing, it's just that they don't know where to start. They don't know what to do. And you want to learn how to advocate, be a champion to your city and say, I will do what I need to help make this place better. There are resources out there. They just need community buy-in. Take a chance, with hiring, and work with job coaches, or learn up and do it yourself. There are a lot of resources out there. That's the one benefit to autism, actually, more than lots of other disabilities in this whole spectrum is they actually do have more. There's more there for autism than there are even some other conditions that are like that consider extra training and education on the part of the community. So, yeah, I think that's a great question. I know that even for us too, with our hospitals, we just need to have more education on the part of, police officers, first responders, EMT, what it looks like to have somebody that's panicked because they are in distress, and people that will just shy away and push aside, and not even want to bring somebody into a hospital. They'll just say, it's fine, put a Band-Aid on it, go away. We don't want to deal with you. Like those kinds of things are all like, those are huge issues that where really you just have to have people that are willing to educate themselves more. Yeah. Which IBCCS does. It's great. There's another question here that says, I have a brother who's on the autism spectrum and my family is terrible at the acceptance of this. He constantly hears that he is financially irresponsible and will never be capable of marriage or a family of his own. In all actuality, he is very smart in this area of interest and has a phenomenal memory for events. I know a lot of his discouragement comes from comments and negativity from the family. Have any of you ever experienced interactions like this with family or loved ones? If so, how did you cope with it or correct it?
I've just posted a link to an article that I wrote on Autism Not Weird about what to do if your family doesn't accept autism. It's very depressing how that is one of the most popular articles. I'm not even suggesting it's one of the best articles, it's just the one that's searched for the most. Because yes, quite a lot of people do unfortunately have those experiences where the family isn't really on board, or at least either doesn't accept that someone's autistic or accepts it in a very autism unfriendly way. Now, in terms of how to address this, it's difficult to give a sweeping statement answer to, because obviously I don't know how the family works. That's different. Families have varying levels of acceptance or toxicity and so on. So I try not to give sweeping statements about it. But it kind of goes back, in this case, to what I was saying earlier about the importance of defining yourself by your strengths. And admittedly, this is very difficult when the people closest to you talk about your weaknesses. But yeah, one of my general mantras about autism is know what you're good at, find places in life where you can do what you're good at. And also have a nice, healthy sense of defiance as well. Defiance is one of those attitudes which I think is underrated, to be honest. If you've got people like I was experienced talking down to you or underestimating you, then it can feel really bloody satisfying to succeed anyway, even if just out of spite or defiance. I've got to be honest, it's quite rewarding. But yeah, I don't know how much defiance your brother has, or whether it'll be a motivating factor to prove other people's underestimations wrong. But yeah, besides that, there's the article, you're welcome to read it, and I hope it helps. It contextualizes why some people are not accepting about autism or autism, unfriendly. And I'm trying to remember for the life of me what else I typed in there, but yeah, there's the link. I will actually add, my apologies, someone else is just about to speak. There's just occasionally people don't believe you're autistic for positive reasons. The very first time I came out to my parents about being autistic, they didn't believe me. By the end of the conversation, they'd come around and thought, oh yeah, you know what, Chris probably has a point. But the reason why they rejected it at first was because their understanding of autism was very much a checkbox list of this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, and they couldn't reconcile that checklist of traits / symptoms with the person, their son, who they had known for 24 years up to that point. So in some cases, and again, not suggesting anything about your particular family, etc., But in some cases, it's a misunderstanding about autism and a mismatch between someone's understanding of what autism is versus their understanding of who the person is. So yeah, it's not necessarily anything that the person themselves has done wrong. It may be just a reflection on what their understanding of autism is.
Any other thoughts? That was a heavy one. That's hard.
Well, I would like to say really, I would really like to say really, because I know that there is a lot of ignorant people out in this world that only are, like we all know, in the old school age. But I'd like to really say this about, like, don't label them. It's like it's like they're just like all of us. It's like they're just like all of us. They learn, even though they learn differently, but it's like they are all of us and we all have feelings too.
Yeah.
Well said, Amber. I have nothing to add from what Chris and Amber said. It was spot on.
And strengths, like we all have strengths, especially, and then those with autism have strengths and feelings. And it's like those with special needs are like all of us. They want strength. They have their strengths, abilities, and really confidence. And we all know that confidence is huge. That some of them, like autism or any kind of ability, need confidence and strengths, and they know that they have strengths and gifts.
I think that, despite being able to see that for this particular person, she's seeing a lot of that. I'm grateful that at least, you're there for your sibling. They're not completely cut off, and that puts, you in a really important place. So being able to be there growing up with your sibling and continuing to give them outlets for that and encourage them outside of that with, like, how they can embrace who they are, despite what the rest of the family thinks is better than, you're probably the best that they have for that in the home. So I would just encourage, you to help take care of them. Yeah, guys, I can't thank you enough for your openness and your individual journeys of being where you're at this point in your lives. Like, we're all the same age. That's the other thing too, which is great about all of this. We're all in our mid 30s range. And I think that's also another way that I really feel, greatly connected, especially after this next conversation that we've had together. I really just want to say thank you, and thank you to folks that have tuned in. It's a lot to take in. We like dabbled on so many different topics. There's so much more we could get into. I encourage you to please check out everybody's content to dive in more. It's an endless list of resources that are out there. And when you have the opportunity to accept somebody, do it. I guess that's really, it's the main point. That's what we want to leave with. But thank you guys. And, thank you to ACE and the All One Foundation for helping to sponsor this, and to everybody for tuning in. Have a great night, and good night, Chris.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
All right.